Hello.
Hello. Well, now I miss Esther. Yeah. Hi, Esther.
Oh, we can make get her back.
Hi.
Hi, Esther. We
Yeah,
needed
I
that
hope
moment.
I didn't steal away any of your bicep fun in the
No,
presentation.
don't worry. Don't worry.
Awesome.
Yeah, usually I steal the speaker's fun because I usually ruin their entire introduction sheet and or anything else. So
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
glad
Yeah.
Esther has taken that role today.
Perfect. Well, have fun. I'm just gonna quickly do a bio break and then get back for Barbara's presentation.
Good
Bye
luck.
bye. Hi Barbara.
Hi.
How are you?
Hello.
I'm good.
So did you hear our lightning round question for Esther?
I don't think
Oh,
so,
oh,
because when
oh,
this
good.
Tuesday
Perfect.
started, I was still eating my dinner.
You were still eating, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's good news for us because we can exactly repeat the same questions and we will still get an authentic answer.
This sound efficient. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is kind of get to know you in like a fun way, because I think many of our viewers know you, but they don't know these details. I'm sure. So let's start with what was your first computer?
It was like a PC and someone else built it for me. The store built it for me. I was just using it. I did graphic design, so I used it for that, but I had no clue what was going on. So it
Cool.
was a
But
PC with a monitor.
cool. And what Windows was running on?
Let me think. Well, the first one at home, I remember as a child was the first one. Was the 3.1. I remember at some point we had a very old laptop and it had like tabs of Windows. So you had tabs to run through. And I never found what version that should be because it could be 2.0, but that didn't really come out. But I swear we had a laptop that had tabs in the operating system.
I don't
So if
even
anyone
remember that.
knows, I was really young, so I was really like a child. So it is a long, long time ago. I think it was around the time of 3.1, but it was definitely not 3.1.
Oh yeah. So the best question is now on in the chat. What was the color of the PC?
I know where that one's coming from. Back then, I had a boring white, grayish white that you had back then, and my personal PC now it is purple.
It's purple. Perfect.
I have a purple PC, and the computer name is Paars, so purple in Dutch,
Obviously.
and my laptop is called Zwart or black in Dutch, and that's all the computers I can have unless I find like a white one or a pink one.
So I will have to rephrase this the next question for you a little bit. So what was the first Azure service you played with?
Yeah, I'm afraid it's boring and it's just virtual machine. That's the
Virtual-
one we all start out with, right? And then you discover what you can do with Azure.
Exactly. Was that in the nice looking old interface or in the nice looking new interface?
It was right at the time that Resource Manager became a thing. So
yes.
when we moved, the
Both.
standard was becoming like, don't want to use this anymore. Here's this shiny new Resource Manager.
The time that nothing really worked, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
In between. Oh yeah, perfect. So and then final question. What was the last service you used, touched?
Where
Like
did
just before
we?
this session.
Yeah, I think we ended up with something like a function. Actually, I did a course today. I did a course for the AZ 500 course. So I teach that, and we were at the Azure platform chapter. So I touched pretty much the whole of Azure today. And we ended up with containers. But then again, I improvised a little bit. So I think it was a storage account where we ended up where we were looking through the network possibilities.
A storage account it is. Perfect.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
boring
then.
too. Yeah.
But then, okay, then the last question. So, what do you want to learn next? Like the service you never had time for to dive into, but you really want to learn it?
There's so much of it. I really want at some point to learn actually some coding language that is not PowerShell, because I know PowerShell and I can play around with Python a little bit, and I try to understand C#, but I really want to get a hang of it and just focus on learning a code, because I focus on everything around the code.
Mm.
But it's something, it's not in my daily job, so it takes so much time. And I think if I take some time, I can get a hang of it pretty quickly, because I've been working around it so much, so I can pretty much read everything, but I can't write it. So that would be nice. Just
It's the
one
start of the year,
language.
so that will be a good year,
Yes.
New Year's resolution.
So
to
if
learn
people
about
can
it.
tell me what one of the most approachable codes is.
Oh, that will be a good question for everyone in the audience. What programming language should Barbara learn this year? And it will get you back like next year, and you do a presentation about it.
Yeah, and oh yeah, sure. Yeah, that is a good goal. I'm not going to make any promises, but that does sound like fun.
We will keep you up to it. Perfect. So, Roland, do you have any questions?
Well, I didn't really like my question for Esther because it was a really negative one. But one last question from my side, and that is, we have all been working from home for the last 2 years, and it was a struggle, but there were also very positive sides to the entire working from home. What was the most positive thing that happened to you or was brought to you by the whole COVID situation?
Well, one thing that I really like, and it's not really on working, it's more on community, is that user groups became a lot more accessible. And it's not my favorite, the virtual thing. I do like to be in person with people, but especially with user groups, it's small sessions, it's approachable for people to go to, but a lot of people that are not able to go because they have a life of their own, or they have children, or something else that needs to be taken care of. They can put their children to bed and follow a session virtually, which they wouldn't be able to do in person. And you can get speakers from all over, and speakers that are not able to travel, you are able to give them a stage. So I really like that aspect, and I hope with the user groups that we will come to some sort of hybrid situation where we do keep recording this stuff, because I think we are reaching people that we couldn't reach before. I really like that one.
For sure. Very good point. Thank you. And I think it's now time to not steal any more of your time, because we've managed to almost steal 8 minutes.
Oh no!
And give you the entire floor. So the floor is yours. So if you could start sharing your screen.
Yeah, let me reorganize some stuff. Share screen.
So when you share your screen, I can do a plug for a conference Roland and I are organizing, which is called Azure Lowlands. Of course, we're organizing it with a lot of community members. But if you go to azurelowlands.com, you can get the early bird tickets. They're selling out fast, and there are opportunities to sponsor. But there is also an opportunity for your user group to be there on our community square, where we will have banners, where everyone can present their communities. And in addition to the answer of Barbara, it will also be accessible via a virtual platform. So you can also get your tickets for that. And it will take place on the 30th of June.
And of course, there's still a call for sessions, call for speakers there as well, right?
Still, I think, 12 more days.
So be fast. And if you're watching this YouTube in 13 days, then you're out of luck. But we hope to get a lot of good sessions. And we now managed to steal even 10 minutes of your time, Barbara. So sorry for that.
I must say, I am still looking into changing my holiday plans so I can make the Azure Lowlands. So you need to get there, but I'm really trying.
It
We were
will be
planning to
like
go on
a mini
holiday.
holiday itself. It's going to be so awesome. So
I really want to be there. So everyone go buy tickets, go fill in that CFP.
So I'm now going to take us out of the stream and add your screen to the stream, and then the floor is yours. So good luck.
All right. Well, let's go. Let's talk Bicep, infrastructure as code, and how you can use it all within the enterprise. I will do a small disclaimer before I start. I don't have stocks with Microsoft. I don't get paid for this stuff. I am just really excited about what Bicep can do. I think it's such an awesome tool. So I'm really not trying to sell you anything or anything like that. I just really like this stuff. And I hope in the end I will get you to understand why I like it so much. So about me, we had a quick introduction and I actually get to say all the stuff that I wanted to say for my introduction. My name is Barbara Forbes. I am an Azure MVP as well as a GitHub star. And I work as the Azure technical lead for OGD in the Netherlands. I have a blog about Azure and automation, and I write a lot of posts about this kind of stuff, but also PowerShell Azure Functions, and you can find it on Forbes with a 4.nl. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can find me at BA4BES, and that is also my GitHub handle. And come on, yes, what we're gonna do today. First, we're gonna look at the concept of infrastructure as code. So what is infrastructure as code? And yeah, it's something we need, but why? Why does it make you happy? And how do you approach this in a large environment? After that, we will dive into Bicep, look at some of the more advanced concepts and why it's such a great tool. And in the end, I hope to find time to look at how you can integrate Bicep into pipelines, so CICD pipelines, both Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions. But that's later. First, we're going to consider the concept of infrastructure as code overall and in the enterprise. So let's start with a resource group with some resources. It doesn't really matter what resources they are. This is just for an example. So let's say that you have a requirement where you need a web app and an application gateway to put it out into the internet, and an Azure function for the backend, and maybe a virtual network with a private endpoint so that you can approach it internally. You can click through this in the portal. You can create this in the portal. And actually, if you're not familiar with an environment, I recommend you do, because the portal can really help visualize you with what's going on. So that works. You have a resource group. You've clicked it together, and then the team that uses it says, yeah, we also want the same resource group, but then for the dev environment, and then for the test environment, and all these other environments because of reasons. And now you have 4 environments, and you're clicking through this 4 times. Now, this doesn't seem that efficient, and you're doing it manually, so there's a big chance you're doing this going to make a small error somewhere, because we do that. We have happy little accidents. They're mostly not so happy in a production environment. So at this point, you can create a template file. I called this one Bicep, but it can be anything. This can be an ARM template. This can be Terraform. Can be anything. So you create a file where you describe the environment in code. You use parameters for that, so you can have different names for your dev environment, your test environment, and your production environment. Probably different sizing of all the resources, but pretty much the same overall. So now when they say, yeah, we need a dev environment, or we need another environment just because, then you can just run command and have that running. The other good thing that if there's something is breaking in the environment, or if you don't want to do a large update, you can just deploy it again. Saves a lot of time. So now let's see, we have a bigger environment. So we have that resource right here, that resource group with all these resources. And then another team comes along and says, we want to build our own web app. And we need exactly the same resources. Okay, simple enough. We have that template already. We can just use it again. So instead of clicking through 8 environments, because we needed the dev, the test, and the acceptance, instead of that, we now have one template that we can deploy with a command. Very nice. But then this one happens. Another group comes by, and this is another team. They say, yeah, we want a web app as well, but we don't need a function to run it. We don't need that. We don't have that backend. It's a static website or something like that. This is fine. This is enough for us. So what do we do now? Do we create a separate template? Let me just check. So let's see how we can go with these templates. Do we now create separate templates for all 3 of those environments? Not very efficient. And we already discussed those 2. They are exactly the same, only the parameters are different. And a lot of code is copied within these 3 environments. And if you copy code, then you're maintaining more code. So you're maintaining the same code at 3 different places. We already discussed this scenario. Basically, those 2 environments are exactly the same. We can create one Bicep file for them and just have some parameters like the naming convention and the IP addresses. And maybe a separate file for that environment on the right. But there's a lot of overlap between those 2 environments. And can we fix that within the same environment? Can we fix that in the same template? So we can take that template, add more parameters, and maybe add a condition for that function. But then the question is, where does that end? How far can we take it? So we get this scenario where we have one template for this whole scenario. But what if someone comes and says, we do want that function, but we don't need that private link in that virtual network? Okay, we're adding another condition and another parameter, and we have to deal with all the other parameters, because maybe they say, hey, we want this queue that you haven't even used yet, or we don't want to use port 80 or port 443. Okay, we're having more parameters here. So now our parameter file is becoming pretty complicated. And now that's something new we have to work with. And this is where we need to think about our strategy on how we use infrastructure as code. And there are more or less no wrong answers here. It's not like I can say you need to do it like that, because it depends on your company. It depends on what kind of flexibility you need. And to give an example of how you can how parameters can make it very complicated, I want to show a Bicep template I made of an application gateway. And here I want to show the difference between flexibility and usability. If you're not familiar with Bicep, it is okay. The code is just to make a point. You don't have to read everything. But this is a Bicep template I made for an application gateway. This template is fully flexible. I think the only limitation it has is that you can only add one certificate. But other than that, everything in here is flexible. I did a lot of magic to make it all happen. And by the way, this was so much fun to create. But there's a lot going on. Now, this doesn't seem that complicated, and it doesn't really matter how complicated this template is. The problem is the parameter file. If we look here at the parameter file, you can see there's a lot going on. There's a lot of parameters here. And this can be okay if you need the flexibility, if literally every gateway you create is different. But the problem with this is that you need to actually know what values you need to add. So if we look here, the value is an object with 3 different properties. If you don't know these properties, then you cannot fill in this parameter. And you need to check, what do I need to change and what do I not need to change? So there's so much going on that way, which also means that you need to have a complete understanding of how an application gateway works. And people who have worked with application gateways know they can get pretty complicated, and the configuration needs to be just right. So this makes it pretty complicated to work with. It's flexible. It's not very user-friendly. Now, when I wrote this one, I thought to myself, wait, if we have an application gateway, how often are they used for port 443 and port 80, where port 80, so HTTP, is redirected to HTTPS? That was a use case that you see pretty often. So I made another template. And if you look at this one, it's a lot more options are hard-coded. So here with front end, it's just port 80. That's how it is. Port 443. There's no parameters here. You cannot change this. And this is pretty much the same template. But now if we look at the parameter file, we see there's only 4 parameters here. So we have the name, of course. We have an SSL certificate, which looks complicated. It's not that bad because these are key vault values. And we have a backend address. And that's all we need to set up. So now all of a sudden, a lot of more people take a lot less time to fill in this parameter file. So these are 2 different ways. There's no right or wrong way in this. It's just something you need to consider. How much flexibility do I actually need? You don't need to add everything to parameters. Then again, you don't want everything to be hard-coded, because if you do that, then you need to create a template for every situation. So it's somewhere in the middle where the correct answer is. And the important part is that you need to consider what works for what your company needs. Bicep has a nice little option to work with this flexibility versus usability, and that can make it a lot more easy. And we're going to see that in a few moments. Which is a nice bridge. Let's talk about Bicep. Bicep is an example of infrastructure as code. Bicep is a domain-specific language, which means it was specifically written for what it is. So it's not based on anything else. There's no syntax that's on anything else. This Bicep is just Bicep. In the background, it's C# and it's all open source. You can see all the code. You can add on to the code. So that's a lot of fun to look what's actually going on. And what Bicep is, it's a wrapper around an ARM template. So the ARM templates are still there. In the back end, Bicep is creating ARM templates and deploying those. This also means that ARM templates aren't going anywhere. And you can look at the ARM templates that it's actually generating. But it's a wrapper around it. And it helps with the syntax in ARM templates that's not always that flexible. We'll look at that in a second. Good to know that it is still in public preview, unless I missed the news somewhere past week, because I had a crazy busy week and I missed the last community call. But as far as I know, it's still in public preview. And that is because they cannot guarantee there will be no breaking changes at this point. It is fully supported though. So if you have an issue, you get Microsoft support for it. They're actually working pretty hard on it at this point, so you might get it sooner than you expect. This means that it is production ready. Although it is still in public preview, you can use it in production. The only thing you need to think about is that there is a chance that you need to change something in your templates because a breaking change comes up. So that's something to consider. But for support, this is production ready. Now, what does this look like? What we see here is an ARM template of a storage account. Of course, a storage account, yeah, I worked with those a lot. It's one of my favorite resources for examples because it's a relatively simple resource and it's very quick to deploy. So here we have a storage account, we have some parameters on it, we have a location, and we have the resource where it is defined. So this is pretty simple. But what you see is there is a lot going on. This is quite a lot of lines for what it does. And there's a lot of different kind of brackets. You need to set every character in the right way. You have the commas, you have the semicolons, you have the colons. So there's a lot going on. Quotation marks everywhere and everything needs to be correct. This makes sense because it's JSON, and JSON was meant originally to be read by computers, not by humans. But it happened to be a great language to store configuration. But yeah, if you create an ARM template, you have to suddenly write about it. So that's okay. But it, for example, means that officially, well, in ARM templates, they are accepted. But in the JSON format, officially, comments are not allowed. Because it's for computers. They don't need comments. They need the information. You can do that now in ARM templates. They made that available. But yeah, bit iffy. Not ideal. And let's look at the same resource in Bicep. This is the exact same resource. So in this resource, we see in line 4 is all the information that was in a lot of other lines. In the old template, we see almost no quotation marks. We see a lot less brackets. Let's look at it side by side. So this is a lot cleaner in some way. And I was a bit worried when I started, but it actually makes a lot of sense. And as you see, for example, at line 5, I can refer to storage account name, which is a parameter, without defining that it's a parameter. It looks for that itself. If it sees storage account name like that, it's going to look for a parameter or variable that defines that storage account. So that is really cool. That saves a lot of time. It's a lot easier to write. You don't have to worry about should there be a comma there or not. I think there's pretty much no commas whatsoever in this language. Now let's look at the concepts around Bicep. I mean, this is the interface, how Bicep looks, but what things can we do that actually are easier in Bicep than they were in ARM templates? First of all, loops. If you have used loops in ARM templates, then you know it can be a bit of a struggle with the syntax because you have to define a copy index somewhere and you can refer to that copy index, but that's always a lot of work. Needs to be the exact right syntax, looking through it. It's messy. Now let's look at Bicep and we see it over there on the right here for VNet in VNets. Now this is a loop. I have created an array called VNet with a VNet name in it and a VNet address prefix. And now I have a loop. That's all I need to do. So a lot cleaner that way. I don't have to define it multiple times. It's just right at the top. And if we look closer, we actually see there is a nested array in this array. For the subnets, I also created a subnet. If you're lucky and you have virtual networks that all need the exact same subnets, define them in subnet array. And also in a property, we can have for subnet in subnet array and define them like that. So a lot cleaner than it used to be in ARM templates and a lot less chance of making errors. Conditions, another one. Could be trickier than you would think it would be in ARM templates. It's possible. There was it's different way to do it for a resource and a different way to do it for a property. Always looking through it, what do I need to add? How do I do it? With Bicep, you just use if and then a Boolean. And you can create that Boolean right there. So you can use, for example, if a certain parameter isn't empty, or you can use a Boolean that you just push through there at a parameter like we did here. So if that comes back to false, the storage account will not be deployed. Awesome. A lot easier, a lot cleaner, a lot quicker. Now, the coolest part, modules. If you have worked with Terraform, this might seem a little bit familiar, but let's say they took the best out of Terraform. So let's see how that works. So here I have modules, and what a module is, it is a Bicep file. So here I have that Bicep file for storage account. It's a little bit, it has some more options than the one we saw in the example, but it's pretty much the same. So this is a file that I can deploy to Azure. I can send this to Azure right from here any way I want to. I can deploy this straight away. So this is a standalone file, but I can use this file as a module and refer to it in another file. So if I look here, I have the storage account, but I also have a module with more resources. In this case, a VM that also needs a network interface. So this is another example. Didn't make too much work of it, kept it simple, and a virtual network that you can use like that. And now if I look at the main.bicep file I have here, and I refer to everything with module. And if I look at this one where we have module, I give it a replacement name so I can refer to it. And this refers to the file right here in the modules folder. So I can look at use it like this, define it like this, set the parameters. I just gave it a deployment name, and then set the parameters that were asked in that template. And now I can use that file, although it is in a different file. So I only have to create it once, but I can use it in multiple files. And we had something like that with ARM templates and linked templates. But linked templates needed to be in a public resource, or you needed to authenticate to a storage account or something like that. I don't want to store my ARM templates in a storage account. I want to store them in a GitHub repository or an Azure DevOps repository or a GitLab repository. But I want my code to be where my code is. So this way, you can actually do that, because what Bicep does is generate the ARM template based on this information. So it's generated from your local account. So it can view all those files, pick them together in one big ARM template, and then deploy that to Azure. While I'm here, there's something I want to show, which I think has made it a lot easier. And that is VSCode and the extension for Bicep. I'm going to zoom one more for people who are watching on mobile. So what I can do with the extension is basically that code is going to write itself. It's impressive. So I start with resource, because that's how I define a resource. It already says, are you looking to create a resource? Yes, I am. So tab complete that. I'll give it a name. We'll call this storage account 2, because we already got one right at the top. I'll press space, and it already says, come on, these are all the types that are available for you. So I don't need to remember where the storage account actually is, which isn't that big of a deal with the storage account, but there are a lot of different resources in Azure. So I'll start typing storage, and here it gives me all the options within storage accounts. So I just tab complete that. And not only it does set that, it puts it there, but it also asks me what API version I want to use. So I don't have to remember which one we are using at this point. It puts them in order from the newest of the latest to the oldest, but I can use all of them, and I can tab complete that as well. So this is here. Now I press space and equals, and it asks me if I want to fill in the required properties. Sounds good. And these are all the properties that are needed to deploy the storage account. I can add a lot more, but if I just add these, it will be a correct deployment. Now, these required properties don't work for every resource. At this point, they work for the most used resources. But yeah, like this is pretty handy. So I have to come up with a name, which is a good name. And a location, which didn't I put that? No, I didn't put that as standard. See, it says, do you want to write about the resource group? Yes, I do. At a point at the location. See how much I get to autocomplete. And actually, if I go here, the SKUs are default values. So I'll use standard LRS, because that's the cheapest. And even with the kind, I press space, and it says, these are the options you have to use. So I can pretty much tab complete my way through the whole resource. I do have an idea what I'm doing, but if I don't have an idea what I'm doing, it's fine. I can get used to the syntax like that. So this really helps, and it makes it really quick to create new resources. And it can actually help if you're a bit confused. How should I say it? What should I add? Take it one step further. Every resource in Azure has that property option, and that is an object. And if I press space now, I get all the options within that property. So I get every option that is available for a storage account. And if I, for example, say, yeah, I want to define that it supports HTTPS traffic only, press tab, press space, and it says, do you want to use false or true? Are there at the top, and if else. But let's keep it at true. Right there. So it can get pretty far like that. It knows what options you have, and that can really help with writing. It makes writing a lot of fun, creating resources. If this is still too much work for you, there are also snippets. So if I want to create a storage account, here I get some options. It all starts with res and then storage, and I press tab. I have storage account now. So if you really are lazy, then you can do it like that. If you think that's too much work. This one is, it's too much for me. I like this one to actually do something, have some kind of feeling with it. But if you want to, a lot of snippets are also available. So if you want to get started, this can really help getting used to the language. So we saw modules. Now let's look back at that situation that we just had, where we had two similar resources and resource groups and one that missed one of them. So we had those 3 different templates, or one template with all the parameters. What if we apply modules to this? So this is also just an example of how you can use it, but I can create a module for every resource in here and use a main.bicep file to define the one that I actually need. There's no copy coding in here. I don't need to maintain 2 versions of the same code because it's all in the lowest part. They are all using the same code. It's not to say that this is ideal. This is one of the ways to do it, but it's actually, you can look into having more than one solution per module. So for example, I could also have that right-hand solution in one module and then one module for a function and combine them. Then I still have only 2 versions of the code. So there's a lot of options there to work together with those modules. And like I said, have the right mix between flexibility and usability. But the modules has made it a lot easier. One thing we need to mention that is also now available for Bicep, and especially for an enterprise level, you can create your own registry. This is a container registry, and you can deploy the templates to there, and then you can call on those templates in your Bicep file. And it will use those as long as you are authenticated to use them. You can use those for any Bicep file you want to create. That means that you can really, for a company, create one place where all your company values are worked into your template. So you can make that available for everyone, make everyone use it as long as you're in the same tenant. That's one thing. But if you're in the same tenant, then everyone can use those. So it can be very handy if, for example, if you have landing zones and you have teams that are familiar enough to work with Bicep and create main files, but you want them to deploy the company standard. Create the templates here, or if someone says, hey, we want that solution, and you think we already created that one, you can refer them to a registry, so you don't have to copy code from repository to repository. So that can be very handy. And talking about VSCode, this is also a pretty cool thing. If you have a registry and you have access to that. So here I have my main.bicep file again for a resource for a storage account. And I want to show you how you can use a Bicep registry. Of course, I didn't memorize that URL, and I'm especially not going to try to manually type it. So I'm going to copy paste it. So what I would do is create a resource. Can I call it stuff? Yeah, I still can. And what I'll do is copy and paste the line above. Except I'm going to use version 1. I've got 2 different versions. And did I get this wrong? I got something wrong here. I think I did it like that. Oh, no, I got it. This is not a resource. It's a module. It's late, people. It's always a module. It says a module in that file. So you use it as a module, and I still call it sta, and I will paste that line, put it at 1, version 1. And this I find really cool. This template is in my Azure tenant. It has nothing to do with my local environment. But if I press is, I still get that option to view all required properties. So it reads that template that is in Azure and shows me what kind of properties it needs. And I know it takes my own module because I did a typo in the storage account name. So it knows that and says the parameter for the storage account name. And I can use that one. So this means that if someone is using my templates from a registry and they have permission to view it and to pull the registries from there, the modules from there, then they can get the hints on how they need to work with it right from within their own environment. So another little trick that just makes this all a little bit more approachable. So now let's take this one step further and see how we can integrate this in pipelines. As was talked about before, you want to have some kind of CICD pipeline, where it's ideal that if you create a template, you have it in a repository, and that is automatically deployed to Azure. You can automate the deployment, make sure the environment is the same for everyone, and you can also do some testing. First, let's see how we can deploy it, and we'll get to the testing later. So what we can do here, we have a Bicep file we want to deploy to Azure. You can do that directly. And you take a task and you say new AZ resource group deployment or AZ deployment group create, whichever one you prefer. And you can just define it like you had done your ARM templates. And it will do the ARM template transition in the back. So you won't know it, but that way you can just deploy it directly. You can also do this locally. It also works in a pipeline. But there's another way, and that is to create a JSON file in between. So you would use bicep build main.bicep or whatever it is called, or you would use AZ bicep build main.bicep. There should be an F in between there, I see now. But what this means is that in your pipeline, that JSON file is created. And maybe you can save it as an artifact. And a good thing about that is that you have a record of what was deployed at that part. So that can be helpful if at some point someone is looking at Azure and said, how did this get here? Well, you can see it in the pipelines. And you can perform testing on those pipelines, on those JSON files. There's a lot of testing already available, like the ARM TTK, what if functionally actually works with Bicep, but some stuff that is available for JSON. Maybe you have your own test already written and already ready, which you want to work with. So you create a JSON file and do all the testing on that, and then deploy it to Azure if it works. So that might be a nice option as well. Just to warn you, the JSON file, the ARM template file, it looks pretty ugly. It's not something you should ever write yourself. There is no flexibility in it whatsoever because it's only meant to do that one deployment. So that's just a warning. It does completely work and it is completely valid, but it's not how you would write your own ARM template. So you might, the first time you see one, you might think, what is this? That's meant to happen. So yeah, it's just in the background and you can use it to see what's going on and maybe do troubleshooting if you're familiar with ARM templates and something's not working. So what does this look like in Azure DevOps? Here I have an example. I'm not going to do any live deployments because it's pretty boring. But what we see on the left is that I have chosen to build that Bicep ARM template in the step right over here. I published that to the pipeline, and here I could do some testing, could be right in between. And here in the deployment, I download that artifact again and I deploy it. So what do these steps actually look like? The build step, in this case, I use the Azure CLI, especially at the start of Bicep. The Azure CLI was already updated to use Bicep and PowerShell wasn't. So you needed to download by himself, which is an extra step. I think that is fixed now. But you can use Azure CLI or PowerShell. And here, this is pretty much it. Oh, don't click it. So AZ bicep build file and then main.bicep. This places that JSON file as main.json in the main folder of your agent. So it works like this. I use the Azure CLI because it needs the Azure part. So it also does need to connect with the subscription because otherwise it doesn't use the Azure CLI. But it does not make any connection that it uses at this point. So now we have built it, and let's look back at this step, which is the deploy a Bicep template step. And in this case, I use PowerShell, which you shouldn't do in the same pipeline. Use PowerShell and AZ CLI through each other, and at least that can make it a bit complicated. But yeah, this is a good example. So I use PowerShell. And in this case, I created the parameters and I did new AZ resource group deployment. Last time I tried to do this with Azure DevOps, the default ARM template step was not able to use it. This might have changed by now, but last time I looked at it, this didn't work. So yeah, then you do it like this. works pretty much the same. So that is one option. One thing that is good to see here is that build of that Bicep artifact took only 8 seconds. So you don't have to stop doing it because of the sake of time, it's pretty quick. Now in GitHub Actions, want to do the same thing. Good thing is with GitHub Actions, well, it's pretty much the same concept as it is in Azure DevOps. So we start with a build and a test phase, and then we have a deploy phase, just like we had in those templates we just saw. So with the GitHub action, here is strictly the action that does the Bicep build. And the fun thing is that there is an action available for that. So as you see, it uses an Azure action. So it's created by Azure, and it's a Bicep build action. Which also at the time that I looked at it last was one of the only Bicep options. There are a lot of people writing their own actions, but this is nice. If you look through the code, this actually pretty much just does the same as we just saw. So it pretty much does Bicep build and then whatever input you give it and whatever output you give it. But yeah, there is a step available, might as well use it. So the Bicep build output uses main.bicep and it creates Azure deploy.bicep. And after that, we need to log in to Azure. We didn't need to do that for that Bicep step. And we want to deploy it to Bicep. And in this case, I use the CLI because I used the PowerShell, the last version. And here I use the Azure deploy group create, and then the template file. I have created an environment file for that to show where the file is and what resource group to use. So I can show this anomaly without you knowing what resource group I use. So this is the Azure CLI, and yeah, we use it like that, and this will deploy everything to Azure. As you see, it also doesn't take too much time. There is some testing of running there. And yeah, I do cheat a bit because it's storage accounts. They deploy pretty quickly. Now let's look at testing because, yeah, that's always a thing. Also with ARM templates, how do you test your infrastructure as code? I have written some blog posts on that, both on Bicep and on ARM templates. And you can test them on your code quality. You can test them on if the templates are actually correct. You can test on what they would be deploying with what if. And you can test on if they are what you would expect for the company standard and for the Azure TTK, or the part where you say, is it secure? To say it like that. Does this follow best practices? One thing you can do, and I want to show this in Visual Studio Code because it will work here as well. Let me just take this away real quickly. So here we have a testing file. And what I have here is bicep config.json. You can create a configuration around Bicep in your repository. If this is somewhere in your repository, then it will work for the Bicep files in that folder and the ones below it. And I'll close this down real quickly because it's a long list. And what I can do here, I can do a lot of settings. I can make aliases for registries, for example, so my code becomes a little bit more readable. But one thing we see here is when we have some sort of behavior we don't want, we can set how we want the deployment to respond to it. That's no known word. So what I see here is no unused variables, which is one of the best practices. You don't want any variables that you don't use. What this does by default is give a warning error. So if I look at an example here, and we have our storage account again, and if I create a parameter that I don't use, it will give me a warning saying the parameter example is declared but never used. If I want to deploy this template, it will work out fine. It will just go through, no problem at all. But this is not the best practice. It's not clean code. It shouldn't be there if there's something in production. It makes it a little less readable. So what I can do is use Bicep Config to say, I want an error on this. So I change that out. I said, if there are parameters defined that are not used, I want you to give an error. And now if I look back at my Bicep file, that little squiggly thing, it has become red. So it's no longer a warning, it is an error. And this deployment will fail based on this error right here. So if this is in a pipeline and you try a deployment, as long as that bicep conf says, I want this to be an error, this will come out as an error. So that can help a little bit with code quality. That's one of the options you can use, and I can show what it looks like in the pipeline. I did the wrong order. Let's just look at this real quick, and then I'll move back. So here I have an error I created. This is the build bicep file step that you just saw in GitHub. And here it gives an error on line 12, an error, no unused parameters. The parameter location has been declared but never used. So that's something that normally would be a warning. It would just deploy. And here it says the error AZ clip script, CLI script failed, and my deployment won't go through. So this gives me some quality control. So that's one of the things you can use. The other things, we just talked about it a little bit. You have custom Pester that you can create. So Pester is a framework based on PowerShell, where you can test your code and what you can do with ARM templates. For example, ARM templates has a JSON output, and you can do something with that JSON. See if it's correct with what you expect it to be. I have created an example where I check if certain tags have been used. If I have tags that are mandatory within my environment, of course, I can check them with Azure policies. But if I check them in the pipeline, then I know it won't be deployed at all right here. And you will see why at the right time. So that's something you can do, and you can check pretty much anything that's in an ARM template by using the JSON output. Now the bicep.config file, we just saw how that works. We have arm what if, and arm what if gives an output of what would be deployed when you run this. So you can use that in two different ways. You can try automating it by, for example, saying I don't want anything to be deleted. So if you run something in complete mode, then you can say if something is deleted, stop the deployment. The other option you have is to put some manual approval in there. So it will give an output of this is what I would be deploying. And then someone manually can click, yes, I confirm this is what I expected to be deploying. Especially to production, it's not that bad to have a manual deployment in there. And even better if you request that the manual approval is done by someone else than that created a template. So you have that 4i principle there. And the last one, I already mentioned it, the ARM TTK, which really looks for the best practices within an ARM template. You can see that on GitHub Actions. There are some default actions for that. And in Azure DevOps, there's some documentation on how you can implement it and use it and read it. I had more images. I thought I didn't have any images yet left. So here we have the example of what if. So if I use what if to deploy my template, then you see in this case it says, I'm going to deploy a storage account. Is this what you want? Is this what you expect? So I can add a manual approval or say, yeah, it's only going to deploy something. It's not going to delete anything. This is fine. Move on. And here we have the ARM TTK. So the ARM TTK is also based on Pester. And here you see that this one fails because the location parameter does not, the location parameter of nested templates would not have a default property. And that is a bit difficult because, like I said, the ARM templates do not follow all the best practices. Because it will be hard-coded somewhere, because it's in the right place at the bicep, but yeah, it's generated. So you do need to be critical. Do I actually need this? Is this actually a correct setting? It might give some false positives. So check on that, and then you can say you want to exclude something. But overall, as you see, you can check the schema. You can check if min or max are correct. So you can check everything around your ARM templates, your bicep template. So think that's pretty much it. That's a lot of information here, but now I hope you're excited as I am and think, well, let me start off with my own stuff. How do I start off writing my own templates? Well, you saw you can do it in Visual Studio Code. That works very well. Another option that you have a few options here. You can look at GitHub at the repository that stores Bicep. So that's /Azure/Bicep. That's Bicep. You can read all the code you want. You can view the documentation and links to the Microsoft documentation from there. You can see the issues, so you can see what people are working on, what is still expected, what problems people have. You can set your own issues if you find some problems. So it's really nice to look it all through. I'm going to shamelessly plug my own website here. I have the category Bicep. I've mostly written about the deployment through the pipelines, so through Azure DevOps and through GitHub Actions, some deep dives and some about custom modules that you can use, for example, for your naming strategy or your tagging strategy. And this link is a little bit butched because it's so long, but overall, Microsoft Learn. Go to Microsoft Learn, select that you want to search for Bicep and the resource type learning path. There are 5 learning paths out there and they are very good. And people who know me know I am a big fan of Microsoft Learn, but these modules really take you from zero to hero. They take you all the way. Also about some concepts of infrastructure as code, some concepts of how you use Git are also in there. So it's pretty complete and really it's a really nice resource to start your own way. And I also recommend it if you have already been working with Bicep for a while, because I did them pretty recently. I did some of these modules and I still learned new things. So these are some great resources to work with. That's pretty much it. If you, we'll go through some questions, I think, in a second. But if you think of something later on or you want to discuss anything, you can find me at Twitter at BA4BES. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you for such a wonderful session on Bicep. I really loved it. I already love Bicep, but I learned something every time about Bicep, something new. The enterprise registry was new for me, and that opens up so many possibilities. That is so cool.
Yeah.
I really loved it.
My timer is up. No, it's really.
We also had some questions, if you're up for them, from our viewers. And the first one is, as a Terraform user, why would you switch to Bicep? And the question is even larger than that, because really also added, I understand its utility in Azure, but real life is not just Azure. 9 out of 10 Azure organizations often use infrastructure as code for Kubernetes, S3 buckets, TLS providers, legacy, etc., etc. What's your take on this?
Yeah, that's one of the things with Bicep, if you compare it to Terraform, is that Terraform, of course, is multi-cloud. It's more providers are in there than there are in Bicep. Bicep at this point is everything that ARM templates can do. They do have some ambitions to, at one point, add like Azure AD, for example, but it's not there yet. And that's something that Terraform can do and Bicep can do. So especially if you work with larger environments or multi-cloud, then Terraform might be the way to go. They are pretty similar. Some good stuff was taken from Terraform and put into Bicep. There is 2 things that makes me choose Bicep over Terraform. For one, Bicep is always up to date because it's created by the ARM template team. It's created by the Microsoft and Azure teams. Where I must admit my experience with Terraform is a few years ago, but I remember that sometimes new resources would come out and it wasn't available in Terraform yet. And then you had to write PowerShell to do those specific things or create an ARM template within your Terraform. So that's one thing where, Bicep has that that Terraform doesn't. Another thing that might be a personal one, but I'm not a big fan of the state file. the state file, I remembered always getting corrupted and it giving issues, and you have to store it somewhere and it has to be secure. And basically with Bicep, your state file is Azure itself. So I really like that one. As far as other technology that comes in between, like Kubernetes and other code, I usually solve those things within the pipeline. So I use two different kind of codes, one for all the Azure infrastructure and one for everything that happens within Azure. So I often find that there are two different teams that are using those codes. So often they have, or either you have your own pipelines or you have your own steps within a pipeline. So that makes it work like that. Who's responsible for that? But it is a good thing to consider, that if you want to combine it with code, Bicep can't do that at this point.
Okay, thank you. But if you're using Terraform at the moment, you're probably not going to migrate, right? You're just going to use Terraform and use Bicep for other projects. And
yeah, like I said, the state file and the fact that it's always a little bit behind with new technology, it would make me want to switch.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's personal. There's no right or wrong answer.
Of course.
In that, yeah.
We had a question from Zing as well. Do you have example for a multi-dimensional array in Bicep? And can we just do a for each instead of a for loop? I already shamelessly added a link to your blog because you did a very extensive blog post on for loops, right? So I think it is in there already.
Yeah, I did one post completely on for loops, multi-dimensional, and saying that, you work with different objects. I think it's somewhere in there, and otherwise someone put it in the comments. Because there were other people asking those questions, and I didn't have time, and someone else answered it. So that was awesome.
Perfect. So find the example in the blog, because I really love your blog. I love reading
Thank you. And for each part, I did these were working on an array. You can also do them based on numbers. And you can combine the two if you want. So you can do it with an array, but still use the numbers it would have. So you get an index, for example.
Perfect. Total flexibility.
Yeah.
And we have one question. Have we time for the last question, Hank?
Yeah.
Oh, it's already up there. Do the Bicep registries offer any extra features compared to template specifications for ARM templates? It sounds like using a template spec as a linked template. From Leo.
What I would say with ARM template, the template specs, I expect them to be used by people who are not familiar with Infra code. So I would expect a template spec to be like a resource that you can give some sort of library to people who need Azure resources, to say, here, you can fill out the menu and get your resource. So the people that would normally be working in a portal, but now you can say, here's the template spec, because every resource there is according to our company standard, or already has the networking in place, for example. So you can make it easier for people to use their own little part of Azure when they are used to the portal. So for that case, I would look to template specs, and if people are able to use infrastructure as code, or are willing to do it, or have the skills, then they can write their own infrastructure as code and make use of a Bicep registry for that.
Perfect.
So I think that's the biggest difference for me.
Okay, excellent. Well, these were the questions. Hank, do you have any last questions? The last questions.
Oh, question? No, actually. Well, I've never done. I learned a lot because I always still click in the portal to make my demos.
The portal is awesome, though. The portal is underappreciated. I mean, the fact that we were talking with the course today, the fact that there are 200 resources and almost all the menus are consistent. I mean, how do you do that?
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's really performance nowadays. It actually works, because in the past, when even the old portal or the newer old portal, it was so slow. But that's not the case anymore. It's just
it took a little bit of time also with the consistency. I know there's the Azure Alerts just got added to the consistent menu after we have it for like a few years. But and I really like it how it visualizes stuff. You just get an image on what's actually going on. Code can be very abstract, and in the portal you can just visualize, oh, this is what's happening.
Yeah,
It
and
is-
it works great on your mobile. If your app
Sometimes.
service crashes, you can just go on your mobile, click reset, and it kind of works.
That is true, actually. I tested that once with an iPad where I wanted to run PowerShell on an iPad, so I did it through the Azure Cloud Shell.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found that an iPad doesn't have tab complete. And then I bought a crappy little Bluetooth keyboard so I could write code. And then I made a picture and I never did it again. That was a fun blog
Everything for a
post.
tweet.
Very cool.
Perfect.
It feels kind of unfitting to end with the portal with the infrastructure as a code session.
Yeah, how did I do that?
Yeah, that's usually our fault. So
Yeah.
sorry about that. But thank you for an amazing session. Thank you for
Visual Studio
making
Code,
time.
Bicep extension.
And the portal.
Yes.
Oh.
Oh,
So thank
Cool.
you for being here during your busy day. That was
Thank you.